Speaking of lucky old sun, the sun, or the soul of the solar system, is not at the center of our solar system discussion today, I guess you could say, but it is maybe kind of ironic that the ticker symbol we're talking about now is SOL, which stands for Solana and not shit out of luck. So, what is Solana? Well, technically, Solana is a centralized cryptocurrency blockchain. Wait, what? That's right. Solana, unlike Bitcoin, does not run on a fully decentralized system, meaning there are central points of control. And while there are some efficiencies of scale that can be generated in this way, there are also some drawbacks. One of them is trust, because you don't know if the team might rug you. Well, I think Solana has demonstrated at this point that it does not appear to be a rug. It appears to be a very solid cryptocurrency. And yes, I know you can point to all of the technical flaws and errors and problems that they've had. And sure, they might even continue happening. However, they've also demonstrated that as they improve their network, the errors happen fewer and fewer, less often, right? They happen less and less often. And by the way, even if you're a Bitcoin maxi, let me remind you that during the first few years of Bitcoin, in fact, more than the first few years, in fact, as recently as just a few years ago, there have been technical issues with Bitcoin, including one of the very first ones, which was the ability to print infinite Bitcoins, right? Which was caught by the developers and quickly fixed. And then there was another one, another number of years later, which was actually caught by a Bitcoin Cash developer. And instead of, printing zillions of Bitcoins into his wallet, he actually brought the problem to the attention of the Bitcoin Core devs, and they quickly resolved the problem before anybody exploited it. So, and that's just two, right? There's been a number of little glitches, little problems, technical errors, and even a couple of times the network was effectively down during the very early days when the network was still tiny and when practically no one was using it, but there were people, we were using it already, but it didn't affect many people, and it was important to fix those errors, and the network was down due to some technical reasons. And again, the core developers of the blockchain fixed those problems relatively quickly. Since those early days, the network has been up, even during the latest glitch a few years ago where they found, that infinite money printer problem. That didn't stop the network, right? It kept running fine. And Bitcoin has effectively been running nonstop with 100% uptime for more than a dozen years, and with more than 99.99% uptime for the past 15 years. So, what does that mean? Well, that means that the glitches that happened in the first few years of Solana are nothing new, in the sense of this is what happens when you create a new massive project intended to scale, significantly at a rate of many millions of users around the world using it 24/7 for different reasons. You're going to have issues from time to time, especially in the beginning. And that's exactly what has happened with Solana. And yes, it's annoying. And yes, it's especially annoying considering that those things happened on Solana when crypto was already not brand new. And arguably they should have known better. They should have made it so that those issues would not happen. But they didn't. Because like all things made by people make mistakes. Nothing is perfect. and not just things made by people, but people make mistakes. It's a natural part of being human. And developers are still human. And yes, I know you can use AI bots to program, but guess what? You still need humans to edit and make sure that the code generated by AI bots is correct. Because AI bots also make mistakes. In fact, they make them on purpose. Hold on one second. I'll see you right back. Let's do this thing. There you go. Bye. Next slide. Reset. Yeah, recess. Yeah. Good, thanks. Alright. So, where was I? Yeah, so Solana has been basically running pretty smoothly, considering that it is, in fact, a crypto that is running on a centralized system. And, of course, having a centralized system, again, does give you certain efficiencies of scale, which you don't get, sorry about that don't give you efficiencies of scale in the same way that you have with open distributed systems. On the one hand, things can be much faster when they're centralized, and that's why you see transactions on Solana occurring at light speed, incredibly fast, almost practically instantly, without having to have a second layer solution. And the other hand, or the other benefits, main benefit really for most people, is that the transaction fees are incredibly low if you compare it to like Ethereum, which is arguably a very decentralized system, even though it's switched from proof of work to proof of stake, right? You could even say it's cheaper than Bitcoin transactions, but Bitcoin can also have remarkably low transaction fees because if you look, just yesterday, there was a transaction, I think it was just yesterday, there was a transaction for like $4.3 billion, and it costs $2.82 to send. Now, I don't know about you, but if you send $4.3 billion through a bank, first of all, it's not going to take a small number of minutes or even go quicker than that. And it's certainly going to cost you more than $2.82, right? And it's going to take a huge process with Swift and other intermediaries, right? It's going to be a whole lot of time to block and stop and resend and who knows what. Now, maybe you want to send via a bank for all those reasons that they secure the transaction and everything. But on the other hand, you could see those intermediaries as not securing the transaction. They're actually adding risk. It depends on the nature of your transaction. With Bitcoin, there is no middleman necessary if you send from one wallet to another directly, right? Without having middlemen in between, like, wallets that are managed by centralized exchanges or brokers or whoever, right? If you send from your own wallet to someone else, you can send massive amounts of Bitcoin and that equivalent of dollar value, right, for extremely low prices. But the same is true for Solana. You could send huge amounts of money worth of Solana, for fractions of a penny. And why is that? Again, because of the nature of their centralized system. And one other thing that is very good about centralized systems, is very good for the project. It's not necessarily good for the people, but it is very good for the project, is the way the code is developed and way applications can be developed can actually be much more friendly to advancing development at a much higher rate. For example, if you look at open source systems like Linux, right? Yes, the code is amazing, yes, you get really fast development times, but if you look at the overall sheer number of consumer applications that are popular and available to the average person, most people use Windows and or Mac. And of course, Mac is now built on Linux, and even Windows has, Linux code in it. Really, Mac is built on BSD, but it operates as Linux. But hold on. All right. But there are far more consumer-friendly applications available on Mac and on Windows than there are on Linux. And don't get me wrong, I love Linux. It's amazing. It powers the internet, frankly, and without it, you wouldn't have such things as Android, which power most of the mobile phones in the world, right? So Linux is incredibly important, and it's an open source system. However, right, even the Android phones that you use with all these apps on them, they're not developing Linux code, they're developing Android code, which is a derivative of Linux for mobile. And it is a derivative that is, that was bought by Google. They didn't develop it, but they bought it, right? And Mac, obviously for the iPhone, has a proprietary OS for the iOS, for mobile devices that are Mac-based or Apple-based. And Windows has obviously a ton of applications available for its systems that are consumer-focused and consumer-friendly and all that stuff, right? So it just goes to show that the developer toolkits that are built by proprietary systems tend to be more sophisticated in terms of being able to create more consumer-friendly applications in certain ways that appeal to more people, because of the fact that most consumer-operated devices are running those systems, so they have, more advanced or more developed toolkits for developing new applications, whether it be on personal computers, tablets, mobile phones, or whatever other device. And that isn't to denigrate open systems at all. And yes, believe me, I know that Linux is able to develop applications much faster than proprietary systems, because proprietary systems put all these checks in place to make sure that everything passes their standards and everything else. Linux, you can just build it and release it. You don't need anybody's approval. But that has its own drawbacks, because you can get a lot more buggy systems. But you can still get buggy systems, obviously, with proprietary systems. I mean, just look at Windows, right? It's intentionally buggy. Right? They release it with bugs on purpose in order to be able to release updates and new versions that people have to buy. And, arguably you could say Mac has a very slow and grinding process for development, because they want to make sure things meet all their standards and this and that. But nevertheless, there are more consumer-friendly applications on proprietary systems than there are on open systems. And that's just a fact. It doesn't matter if I like open systems or closed systems or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. What matters is that it is how it is, right? And so what you need to keep in mind, really, is that Solana very much is in that proprietary system of code development. Right? It operates based on proprietary systems. It operates based on proprietary code. And it operates based on the concept of a proprietary network that is centralized, that is managing transactions, and therefore makes the experience of using Solana very different than the experience of using something like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin, which are open systems that are fully distributed and fully decentralized. And again, it doesn't matter if you like Ethereum versus Bitcoin or whatever. They are open and decentralized systems to Solana, right, or other closed systems. But Solana is what I'm talking about here. Now, why am I talking about Solana in particular? Aside from the fact that it's a centralized cryptocurrency. Well, Solana started also as a very cheap, coin. You could get them for pennies back in the beginning. I think they were like 2 cents or something when they started, maybe 20 or whatever. It was really cheap, well under $1. And those who were, smart enough about it, I guess you could say, at this point, bought a whole bunch of stacks and have seen their profits on their returns on revenue, if they've held, go up massively. Now, when I say massively, let's keep it in proportion. It went up from a couple cents, whenever it launched 5 years ago or something like that, up to like $260 a few years ago in 2021 at the high, and it again went up to like 220 in March this year. So, it's seen some really nice returns. Of course, it hasn't gone up as dramatically as Bitcoin went up in its first 5 years, but no coin really has, because, well, no coin is like Bitcoin, right? No coin is the first mover that actually was adopted, right? First movers aren't always the winners, but in the case of Bitcoin, so far, 15 years in, which is a pretty long time in tech, 15 years in, Bitcoin is so far the winner because it does have first mover advantage, and it did scale, and it did, pull a massive land grab in terms of the number of users who buy it. Part of that reason is because it's been the coin with the top price. Now, you could say, well, there were DeFi things that were worth more than Bitcoin back as far as 2018 or whatever. It was, what was it called? Something with a Y. Whatever. Something like a DeFi project on Uniswap that people were going crazy for because it had tremendous yield or whatever. I forget the name, to be honest. And it was, at some points worth, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever. It was, some insane price. Okay, look at it now. Where is it now? Does anyone even remember its name or talk about it? I mean, I'm in crypto every day, and I haven't heard the name of that project in a very long, in years. Right? I had to look it up recently, just out of curiosity, and it has certainly not held up in the same way that Bitcoin has. Solana, on the other hand, is showing signs of having a continued outlook for growth, and does certainly seem like it could potentially grow into a stronger project with more, adoption, more scalability, more applications being developed for use on the coin. And again, you don't necessarily need more applications if you've invented a form of money, your cryptocurrency, and that's already an application. Your application doesn't have to do more than it already does. Yes, there's a demand for new features or whatever by users usually, but frankly, Solana has delivered on that with the advent of NFTs on Solana, and meme coins, etc. on Solana. So it has actually delivered already more features that people can enjoy if they want, but really it doesn't need to. However, it already has, and that's to demonstrate again that a centralized system is capable of quickly developing those things. Oh, you can say, well, Bitcoin has also developed ordinals and now runes. Okay, but it's 15 years in to Bitcoin, and those are the two things that are invented, or that have been invented on it, right? Yeah, you could say, well, layer 2 things like Lightning have also been invented, and SegWit was also added to the protocol. Okay, yes, but again, so now you're talking about 4 or 5 different major things, right, that have been created on top of the original Bitcoin code. I'm not talking about bug fixes, I'm talking about significant feature upgrades to the Bitcoin code in 15 years, which is still pretty impressive That's an average of 1 every 4 years or so, which is frankly amazing for something that is not necessarily intended to do anything other than to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system of both being a currency, a cryptocurrency, and being the network upon which the currency moves and is secured and is mined and is held and is all those things, transacted, bought, sold, held. So it doesn't really need to do more than that. And frankly, no crypto really needs to do more than that. But they all have this desire to develop more abilities in order to do two things. One is to demonstrate that they have more features than the competition, so they have an additional value to people who are thinking about potentially buying it. Like, I could spend, $1,000 and buy a bunch of Solana and do these things with it, or I could buy $1,000 and buy some ETH and do these other things with it, or I could buy Bitcoin and do these things with it, or I could buy whatever XRP and do these other things with it, right? Most coins don't really do much or anything other than exist as coins, and that's fine. You don't actually need them to do more than that. What you need them to do is to do that one thing extremely reliably and well, right? If you are a long-term holder, you want the product to work consistently, reliably, and without fail. And yes, there can be failures and glitches, but as long as they're fixed quickly and the status of the network is returned to functioning normally very quickly and is improved over time, then that is perfectly acceptable. However, you have consumers, again, who want to see more value, quote unquote, built into the technology. Well, here's the thing. Anybody who's a blacksmith or a knife maker will tell you it's one thing to make a knife, a single edge, single blade knife, and make it extremely high quality and do that thing, right? And make that your business and just make amazing knives. It's an entirely different business to try to make a multi-purpose utility device like a Swiss Army knife, which has a blade for cutting and another blade for sawing and scissors and a toothpick and tweezers and 50 different things, and a magnifying glass, a measuring stick. It's got everything in it, right? So that's a completely different device, right? Yes, it's a Swiss Army knife. It's called a knife, but it isn't just a knife, right? It can be used for many different things. It's a multi-purpose thing, and they both have values. And the fact is, much as I love Swiss Army knives, they tend to break much easier, and parts of them will break, and it'll still function, and it'll still be multifunction. But they tend to be the kind of knives where something will break off. Even a leather man will have pieces break off more easily and more often than single-purpose devices like a single-purpose knife, a single-purpose measuring stick, a single-purpose pair of scissors, right? The point of the Swiss Army knife is that it is practical. It has all these things packed into it. Now, I say that ironically because at Alpha Trading, where I'm one of the co-founders, we've released an entropy indicator, which we call the Alpha Trading Swiss, inspired by, allegedly, the Swiss Army knives, because it can do many things at the same time. And the code works remarkably well. It has not broken. But, that said, the code is composed in many different parts, many different pieces of code put together. And it's entirely probable that at some point, part of it will break, and we will need to, fix it, right? Or replace it with an upgrade, or do something to mend it, essentially. How do we know that? Well, because, for example, TradingView changes their code base with some regularity, on whatever basis, whether it's random or not. They'll occasionally change something that affects indicators, and then those affected indicators need to be upgraded in order to keep working. We've had that happen already on a number of our indicators, including single-purpose ones, by the way, right? But the single-purpose indicators usually have, 2 or 3 functions built in, but it's for the purpose of a single indicator. But still, we've had to, update code even for the single purpose ones. So you can imagine for the multi-purpose ones, it absolutely is very probable that parts will break, just like a Swiss Army knife. And then you need to either replace that part or operate with it partially broken, and use the rest that are working fine, or build a new indicator or a new tool that works normally again. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this to tell you effectively that I think Solana remains a highly undervalued coin. It's my opinion, so don't take any of it as any kind of advice, but I'm just telling you what I think. I think Solana has massive potential for growth. Both in terms of the software development that it will achieve with new apps and everything else, and new features, as well as in returns. Right, the returns on investment seem well poised to grow significantly over time. Now that's my opinion. That doesn't really matter what I think about that. It really doesn't matter, because all that matters when it comes to returns is actually the volatility, entropy, probability, and statistics. We've seen that so far, Solana has been a really good investment. Right? It has, in fact, delivered very nice returns for people who've held it for a number of years. Right? A year and a half ago, when the market was at a local low, Solana had dumped from $260 all the way back down to $8. How many of you backed up the truck then? How many of you loaded up on Solana coins when it was $8? And now it's, back at over 160, 170, whatever it is. It was recently at 220, right? Those were insane gains. In 2023, Solana went up basically 1,300%. And from the $8 market, it went up even more than that, from like late 2022. Right? If you bought at $8, right, that was basically the second chance, if you will, of getting it at relatively low cost. Right? The second big chance. Now it's in the 160 area, and arguably, the way I look at it, is it's still relatively, strong value. That could, we could see this coin easily go to, $500, maybe even $1,000 in the future. I don't see that as impossible at all, especially if we have, a cycle, quote unquote cycle. I hate that term, but a period of time when we'll see the overall market see the returns yield, more than 100% growth for each of the leading coins, right? And what does that mean? That means that the price action will follow. So if the returns are going to double, it's very likely the prices will too. I don't see that as impossible for Solana. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So, yeah, may the soul shine down on your soul and your soul, and keep you happy and well ensconced in your world of crypto. Happy trading, folks. See ya.